Good morning and welcome to Our Issues Milwaukee. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. This morning we have the privilege of being joined by Milwaukee's 2nd District Alderman Cavalier Johnson, who serves as president of the Milwaukee Common Council. President Johnson was first elected as alderman in 2016 and was re-elected without opposition in 2020. And as I stated, he was also elected by his peers to serve as Common Council president. How are you, President Johnson?
I'm doing very well, Andrea. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on Our Issues Milwaukee.
It's good to have you here. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And needless to say, we've got a few important issues to discuss, but I want to say it feels like a full circle moment, because what was it like? Was it 5 years ago that you were visiting the show as a candidate for office, and now here you are as the Common Council president? A lot of great things happening for you. So talk a little bit about what your journey has been like to where you are today.
Well, you're absolutely right. My first time on the show was about 5 years ago when we interviewed for that. Of course, my journey into elected office started even years prior to that. It all really started going back to when I was a 14-year-old boy 20 years ago. And finding that I wanted to have a career in service to this community. I fell in love with serving the community via team programming at the YMCA and studied political science at UW-Madison, and just never really looked back. In terms of my journey since I've been elected an alderman, when I came on your show 5 years ago, I told constituents in my district, as well as folks around the city, that I would be trying to focus on three things at the time. Those would be public safety and infrastructure investments, as well as economic development. And I think we've done a lot of good things in those areas. So over the course of my time in office on public safety, the very first piece of legislation that I sponsored as an alderman that was passed by the council targeted vehicles that have tinted windows, and not just the vehicles, but also the businesses applying window tint that was too dark. Because it was a public safety issue. These are, a lot of times the cars that are driving recklessly and doing a lot of other things that harm our community. So it gave the police department some additional tools to be able to go after those businesses. We made changes to the pursuit policy so that when those same sort of individuals were driving recklessly, endangering the greater public safety, police have more latitude to be able to get them off the street. We worked along with our partners here at the Common Council to accept a $10 million federal COPS grant to help to slow down the attrition of officers in our police department. We worked with the chief of police, Jeff Norman, to launch the TSU, or Traffic Safety Unit, to address issues of reckless driving. And after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement last year, we sponsored some legislation that was adopted by the Fire and Police Commission, helping to put forward some reforms. And I'm very proud of those things. In terms of infrastructure, we've worked to get speed humps in neighborhoods across the district. We've got reconstruction projects, complete street reconstruction that's happened on some of the busiest thoroughfares in the 2nd District. I'm talking 60th Street, parts of Fond du Lac Avenue, 91st Street. We've had high impact paving programs on Hampton, on 84th, on Villard Avenue, parts of Fond du Lac Avenue. As we're also building up West Lawn, we continue to do that. With economic development, Walmart closed shortly before I took office. But we didn't let that deter us, because Midtown Center is the heart and soul of economic development in the district. And so we worked with our partners in order to get a local business inside the former Lowe's building. So we have sellers of durable material that's operating out of there. We've also got America's Best Wings that have opened up, Black Beauty that's opened up, US Cellular that's opened up, Laughing Crab Restaurant that's opened up, Foreman Mills, NYPD Pizza. We've got millions of dollars of improvements coming to the Asian market as well. So those are the bread and butter things I said that I'll be running on. I think we've delivered. And then we've got some other things we've worked on as well, including working to create the Office on Early Childhood Initiatives here at the city. We were the first city in Wisconsin to pass a conversion therapy ban. And that really opened the door to other communities across the state doing the same. So we've had a statewide impact with that, not just here in Milwaukee, but other communities throughout Milwaukee County, as far north as Superior, as far south as Racine, and so many places in between. And then we also got passed and recently got the recommendations from the Millennial Task Force. So we've been busy in the past 5 years.
That's pretty obvious, and I really am impressed with you being able to just kind of run down the line of all those things that you've been working on. And you did mention infrastructure, the investment of that, public safety reform, early childhood education. There's also equity and inclusion, as well as the economic development pieces. But I think it's safe to say that public safety remains a priority for you. I think it was just 3 years ago that you were on the show, and we were discussing the situation where there were gunshots that hit your car right outside your home. And then I believe there was a Milwaukee police officer that was hit by a driver who ran a red light and was killed. So it looks like we are still looking at those as major issues across the board in our communities. So let's get into that, the stolen vehicles and the speeding, as they remain a problem. But just a few days ago, Mayor Tom Barrett announced that he would like to use $6 million of the American Rescue Act funding to address reckless driving in the city. Give us your thoughts on that and how much you believe that is going to help make a change.
Well, reckless driving has been a scourge on Milwaukee for some time, and I believe that we can trace the genesis of it back to a decision by one of our former police chiefs some years ago to get rid of our pursuit policy in the first place. When that happened, it opened up the floodgates, I believe, to people who felt like they could drive with impunity and do whatever they wanted to on our streets, and they knew that they wouldn't be chased or accosted by the police unless they were committing a violent felony crime. When you take the guardrails off, and people think that they can do whatever they desire to do behind the wheel, it yields things like we're still dealing with today. So the changes that we made around the pursuit policy are helping us to put the genie back in the bottle, as it were, on that. And additionally, we have worked on the council since I've been in office in order to put funding into Milwaukee Public Schools, so we have universal driver's education. It's so important to make sure that folks have the foundations and fundamentals of driving before they get behind the wheel, and NPS can be a real partner with us in order to make that happen. So we did that. As I said, earlier when I talked about infrastructure, we've worked with neighborhood groups across the 2nd District in order to install traffic calming speed humps in our neighborhoods around the district so that we can help to mitigate the effects of reckless driving. And one of the things that we've been working on as well is trying to partner with the state to see where we might be able to come together to have curb extensions out on some of the state highways, technically state highways that run through the city of Milwaukee, such as Capitol Drive, that are known for reckless driving. These are known hotspots for that bad sort of behavior. And if we had curb extensions, these bump outs, it would stop people from being able to pass on the right like they do, which contributes mightily to our issue of reckless driving. When our county executive was a state representative, he was my personal state representative, and we worked together to get a bill in front of the assembly that stalled in the Senate that would allow for us to use technology that's available to us for traffic enforcement using cameras. But unfortunately, it did not go anywhere in the Senate. So those are some impediments that we face. It's not just us. We have to work with our partners at the county. We have to work with our partners at the state in order to get in front of some of these things too. In relation to what you're talking about with the mayor's proposal to add some ARPA funding to address reckless driving, those are things that the county council are going to be looking at over the course of the next several weeks and months. It's important to make sure that we use these fundings in a way that's going to be beneficial to all parts of our community, and that especially includes issues around public safety as well.
Yes, and just to make the viewers aware that $6 million is part of $394 million that the city is getting in federal funding, and $30 million the mayor wants to use for housing initiatives. $1 million would go to Milwaukee Police for new motorcycles and overtime funding. And like you said, this is something that would have to be approved by the Common Council over the next few days or weeks, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have 4 years to allocate these funds. So it's not necessarily a rush, as it were, to spend them. This is sort of like a mini budget. I mean, this is $394 million.
Yeah.
And the Common Council has been very clear from the outset that we want to make sure that we provide, to the greatest extent possible, opportunities for the public to be able to weigh in on these dollars as they're being expended, and provide opportunities for members of the Common Council also to have their ideas and their thoughts heard in this process as well. So certainly there's a desire of the administration to have that plan presented before the council, but it's important too to make sure that the council's legislation that we passed a few months ago is abided by, to make sure that the spending of these dollars is as transparent as possible. And the administration is charged with doing that as well.
Yeah, this is all good information. And dealing with stolen vehicles, Kias and Hyundais have been disproportionately targeted by car thieves. And the Milwaukee Police Department announced just this past Tuesday that there's a new partnership with those manufacturers in an effort to stop vehicle thefts, which had exploded 2,500%, which is unheard of. And there were actually members of the Common Council who wrote letters to the manufacturers saying, hey, this is a big problem and we need to work together to do something about it. So they are going to be distributing the steering wheel locks for certain models through the Milwaukee Police Departments, right?
That is correct. The police department is partnering with those manufacturers, Kia and Hyundai, in order to make sure that people who own those vehicles in the city of Milwaukee have access to those enhanced security measures. Because you're right, there has been a large spike of those vehicles that have been stolen in Milwaukee. And unfortunately, when that happens, it causes us to use police resources, again, to get those vehicles back. Hopefully there's not a chase. And if there are chases, unfortunately, sometimes they end up in situations, or not just chases even, but just driving recklessly. Sometimes it ultimately ends up in somebody dying, either the driver of the vehicle, the passenger who happens to be going along in a ride with them, and most unfortunately, sometimes innocent bystanders who should not be put into harm's way because somebody decided to take some irresponsible act and get behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle. So the police department is partnering with those manufacturers in order to make sure, again, that there is enhanced security out there for people who own those vehicles. And I think that's a good step.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And you had mentioned just in our conversation that back when legislation was kind of changed where there wouldn't be chases, we know that during this pandemic that there was a time that people were able to drive around the city without their license plates or not have their car currently up to registration. And now that that has expired, are you finding that it's hard to now kind of get a grip on the people who have no intention on ever getting their cars registered?
Well, I think that's one of the benefits of having Jeff Norman as the chief of police in Milwaukee. One of the things that he's been able to accomplish is going after that very important issue in Milwaukee in terms of reckless driving and traffic enforcement generally. Members of the Common Council have called for that for years. Our constituents have called for that for years. Jeff Norman actually listened and put together a dedicated group of police officers who are solely focused on enforcing traffic law in the city of Milwaukee. In March, he launched, and I was there with him. It actually launched in my aldermanic district, the Traffic Safety Unit, or TSU. And so the TSU is out there, and it's actually taking complaints from our citizens as well about locations where they ought to be in order to make sure that they are most effective to the needs of the people who live right here in our city. So I would say that's probably a question more for police and TSU. I do know that since they began their operations in March, they have already given out over 8,000 tickets and have had a number of incidents where they have worked to educate citizens behind the wheel, just letting them know about what the rules and parameters are around their responsibilities as motorists. And as we've progressed through the pandemic here, the state, and it was a state executive order from the governor that allowed folks to drive around that way, that has expired, and folks have the responsibility now to make sure that they are currently registered, that their vehicles are. And if they're not, the police department, especially the TSU, will be there to make that enforcement, and that's a good thing.
Yes, and I appreciate you really shedding light on all of these issues. I know for a fact that people really do care about the things that we've talked about up to this point. So if you would stick around so we can continue this conversation and talk about a few other important issues that are going on in our city.
Will do.
We will take a quick break and come back with Milwaukee Common Council President Alderman Cavalier Chevy Johnson right here on Our Issues Milwaukee.